We are starting chapter 2 today. We're starting chapter 2, which is going to be over quadratic functions. Now, the first thing we're going to talk about with quadratic functions is transformations and identifying them based off the graph, or, well, equation, based off the equation. Now, our main equation is going to be this here. Now, A in front is really talking about our vertical stretch or shrink. Vertical stretch or shrink. But if that value is negative, it's not a vertical stretch or shrink. It's a what? Reflection. Because if that value is negative, it's talking about reflections. Because we have a negative in the A or B spot, we're talking about a reflection. It's not applied to the stretch or shrink. So A is vertical stretch or shrink. B, here is really, we're talking about horizontal. Stretch or shrink. And when we look at this one here, it's going to apply just like with left and right. Because when we talk about the left and right, the value of H is always the opposite of what we think. And last but not least, our K is up or down. And I think out of all these here, the transformations that y'all like the best are really the up or down or left and right. Now, the first thing that we have in our notes is the vertical and horizontal translation, up, down, left, and right. We know that we're going to move the function left or right if we have something added or subtracted to x inside the parentheses. And it's the opposite of what we think, because if it's plus 4 inside the parentheses, it's really moving to the left 4. If it's minus 4 inside the parentheses, it's moving to the right. It's the opposite of what we think. But our shift up and down is exactly what we think, because if it's plus 4 on the outside, it's moving up 4. Or if it's minus 4, it's moving down 4. So let's look at this first one here. So we want to describe the transformation for this here to give us this function. Now for this here, there's two main movements. We have the plus 4 inside and the minus 1 outside. Which one do we want to look at first? The plus 4 on the inside. Since it's inside parentheses and it's being added to x, it means it's moving left or right. Now which direction would we be moving here? Left. Because it's the opposite of what we think. And how far is it moving? 4. Because we only have one other movement for this here. And down 1. Left 4 and down 1. Because the plus 4 inside is the opposite of what we think, because it looks positive, it's actually negative. And the minus 1 is exactly what we think. So minus is down, and it's moving one spot. And that's it. Questions on this here? Let's look at the next one. G of x equals x minus 3 squared. Since it's negative inside, we're moving right 3. Since we're subtracting 3, it's moving to the right 3 units. We would graph it, but I'm not worried about graphing. I'm mainly worried or focusing on y'all being able to describe what the transformation is. Questions on this here?
it's negative, it goes right.
Yes, if it's inside the parentheses. So if we look at this here, so inside the parentheses here we have minus 2. So that means it's going where? Right 2 and down 2. So that means any given point on the graph, and this here I included is the graph of f of x squared, our starting function. To our new function, each point is going to move right 2 and down 2. So this here is one of the points. So we have the point 1, 1 on our original graph, yes? So if we're moving it right 2, so it's over to 3, and this here would be our new point, because it's moving all the points like this here. So 0, 0 is going right 2 and down 2. And we get these same points. Same with here, negative 1, 1, right 2, down 2. Would give us this here, so we get an idea of what the graph would look like in its movement. Does this make sense? But that's it. That's all we have to do for this here. Any other questions on this here? So what about this one? So it would be left 5 and up 1. Left 5 and up 1. And that'd be it. I think we feel comfortable with these here, yes? So our next type of transformation is a reflection in the x-axis or y-axis. Now, if it's across the x-axis, the negative is either outside the parentheses or there are no parentheses. Now, really the big one is y-axis. If that negative is attached to the x inside parentheses, it's across the y-axis. If there's a negative in front of the x inside parentheses, it's across the y-axis. It's across the x-axis. Or it's in front of the parentheses itself. Vertical stretch and shrink and horizontal stretch and shrink. Again, so they used A, I used B in the general example. But if there's a number multiplied by x inside the parentheses, it's a horizontal stretch or shrink. If there's a number outside the parentheses, or just by A where there's not by the x where there's not a set of parentheses, it's vertical. Inside parentheses is going to be horizontal stretch or shrink. Outside parentheses, or where there's not any applied, it's vertical. Now, whenever we talk about horizontal stretch or shrink, it's kind of the opposite of what we think. Now, there's two ways we can think about it. So if we look at the horizontal stretch and shrink, and it looks like it should be a stretch, it's actually a shrink. Or we look at it and it looks like it should be a shrink, it's actually a stretch. Now, we'll get to some and look at it, and when we get there, it'll make more sense. So we look at this first one here. Do we have any parentheses? So if we don't have any parentheses, that means it cannot be a horizontal stretch or shrink or reflection across the y, because they need to be in parentheses. It will be a vertical shrink. Yes. So it'd be a vertical shrink. Yes. And a good number of y'all put this on the homework from last time we did this. And again, I'm going to keep counting off points if you just write vertical shrink on this. Because it's vertical shrink of what? It's just 1/2. Because the negative is not talking about the vertical shrink. It's talking about a reflection. because the 1/2 talks about a stretch or shrink, and because it's between 0 and 1, it's a shrink. Now the negative is a reflection. Yes. If it's inside parentheses, it's across the y. If it's outside parentheses, or there are no parentheses at all, it's across the x. Really, if it's inside parentheses, it's y. If it's not inside parentheses, it is x. Any questions on this here? Okay, so we have two things here, yes? We have a 2 that's inside parentheses and the +1. So let's do the +1 first. +1's a little bit easier to work with, yes? The +1's going where? Up 1. Now 2 inside the parentheses is definitely horizontal movement, either stretch or translation. We're either moving left or right, or we're stretching and shrinking. But if we're moving left and right, there has to be a plus or minus, a plus symbol or a minus symbol between the x and the number, yes? Is there one? No. So that's really telling us it's not moving left or right, and y'all probably already knew that. So we're really looking at horizontal stretch or shrink, yes? It's opposite of what we think. Because it looks like it should be a stretch, yes? But it's actually a shrink of. We have to flip it. Not change the sign, we're just flipping the number. It'd be 1/2. Now, one other way we can do, because we can try to do it thinking it's the opposite of what we think of. So if it looks like a stretch, it's a shrink. Or if it looks like a shrink, it's a stretch. Now, the other method is to take whatever number is in front of the x inside the parentheses and flip it to begin with. So if we flip the 2, it becomes 1/2. Because that's the amount that we're stretching or shrinking it by. Well, 1/2 is between 0 and, which is a. That's another way we can look at it. Does that make sense? Pick which one works best for you. Or if you think of another way to help you keep it straight, use it. Because again, out of all the stuff we're going to do today, I think this horizontal stretch or shrink and the amount is one of the more challenging things. Because the rest of it, vertical stretch or shrink, it's just we look at the number, that's the amount, then it kind of matches up and down. That's the amount matches the symbol. The only one that's a little bit more difficult than that is left and right. But again, it's the opposite of what we think, and it's the number. This one's the only one where we literally have to change the amount. We have to flip it and do something to it. So let's look at this next one. So we do have 2. Yes. The negative is only talking about reflections. Yes. Of and exactly. The only time we're going to have it across the y is if there are parentheses and that negative is inside the parentheses with the x. We're not actually subtracting number from it, it's just negative x inside parentheses. Questions on this here? Okay. What's the easier one of these two? Yeah, down 2. and. So it's a horizontal stretch or shrink, yes? So if we did the opposite of what we think, because it looks like it should be A, but it's actually A. Now, and we flip the number. So we know it's going to be horizontal stretch or shrink, yes? The other method is to say, okay, so the number where it stretches or shrinks is 1/4, yes? We're going to have to flip it, yes? So it goes from 1/4 to being 4. So if the amount's 4, it would be a, yeah, it's going to be a stretch. Horizontal stretch of 4. So if there was a negative in front of the 1/4, it would be across the y-axis. If there's a negative in front of those parentheses, then it's across the. But because there's not a negative in either space, now we only talk about reflections and negatives if we're not actually subtracting something from it. It's making something negative. Because the -2 is not a reflection. It's saying it's moving down 2. We're subtracting something from x. We're not just making the x or set of parentheses negative. Questions on this here? Yes. Since it's 1/3 and it's being multiplied by x inside the parentheses, it would be horizontal stretch or shrink. Since it's 1/3, it looks like a shrink, but it's actually a stretch. And we flip the 1/3 to make it a 3. Vertical stretch. Horizontal is inside parentheses. Vertical is outside. Questions on this here? So this one here, vertical stretch of 3 and right one. Because inside parentheses, it's the opposite of what we think. Any other questions on this here? This is the last one we're going to look at. How many transformations are in this? 3. Negative in front of the parentheses would be a what? Then yeah, up 2 and that's it. Any other questions on this here? Because we're talking about quadratics, which are defined by a square. And that's it. So the homework, 3, 4, 7 through 10. Describe the transformation. You're not graphing it. You're just describing the transformation. 17 through 20, you describe this transformation. You do not have to graph it. Well, not do not have to. Don't graph it. Just describe the transformation. 23 through 25, describe the transformation. Don't graph it. Yep.